Apart from a vague recollection of seeing a poster down at Mooloolaba at one of Bill LePage's, I think Rainey and Steve may have been working in the store, of a Baba poster then. I had never heard of Meherabad. That's not true. Richard Alpert's, Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, I had come across that very fortunately, and Baba's got some serious content in there. But as a spiritual teacher, I'd never stumbled across him. And I'm sure that was, you know, as it should be, because the prelude to coming to Baba was fantastic for me. And then, you know, when confronted with this idea that the avatar had been to this place, I was totally incredulous, as you would be. And I thought the extent of the literature was that little bookcase there. So no one told me that there was a wider range. And somehow or other I managed to get hold of Lord Mayhare, and I couldn't debunk this notion that he was the avatar. You know, I said that life was simply a distraction while I was reading Lord Mayhare, and unfortunately I had a government job at the time, so I could, you know, spend as much of my own time as I liked. We were out at Roma in a rented house, so I didn't have too many distractions, young family. But I had become a Hare Krishna devotee, so I had accepted that Krishna and Rama and Muhammad and Buddha were the avatars of the age. And as a Catholic, you know, it was, I didn't have any problem with multiple avatars. The idea of a 20th century avatar having been and gone, and I hadn't heard about him, was most disconcerting. So I wanted to get to the bottom of who Meherabad was as quickly as I could. And you know, the wonderful literary legacy we have is such a great opportunity for people like myself that want to sort out the truth of that. To do so, I'm a bit like Ward Park says he's never had a mystical experience in his life, and I say the same thing. I've never been conscious of having had a mystical experience in my life. So unless I can accept it on face value, you know, I'm not going to have any inner sort of direction. So how we came to hear about Meherabad was an interesting story. I had met Charmaine, and we'd gotten together and we were living together, and we quickly married during an election campaign to save being blackmailed by one of her opponents, who had taken us into his room and said that I'm going to be laying as much muck on you as I possibly can if you dare try and do the same to me. So that was, you know, living in sin wasn't a good look for a sitting councillor. So we became engaged, I guess, very quickly. And within her electorate was Avatar's abode. You know, she extended from Mumbai right through to Kaluan, which is on the northern side of Budrum. So this was part of her electorate, and she'd won the electorate from a very formidable candidate who was an architect, town planner, and, you know, a highly regarded member of the National Party. And she and her colleague, Peter Shooter, managed to unseat him. And so she was the councillor who the trust would be required to deal with, and they had a concern about a proposed helicopter flight from the big pineapple that would go straight over the top, I believe. And so they wanted to speak to council about that. And she was called to meet with Sim and Roy, and whoever else. I was quite unaware of this at the time. And the Avatar's Abode people thought that they would be happy to support her in her re-election campaign, which was about 6 or 9 months off. And we started to have John and Jeanette turn up to campaign meetings and be happy to go around door knocking parts of suburbs, handing out leaflets, because they had a very good campaign. And John and Jeanette would invite us to their fundraisers, and we'd invite them to our fundraisers. And at one party I got talking to Peter Rowan, who was as crazy about Hinduism as I was. And I thought, well, there's someone here that knows about Hinduism, that there's got to be something to this claim that he's the avatar of the age, as the property's name suggests. And that brought us in contact with Baba lovers, and we jumped in the deep end. We took an invitation to go down to a Sydney anniversary. Roy and Roz hired a 14-seater high-ace commuter, and we jumped in, and we were billeted with a psychologist and his wife, who now lives in Alice Springs, Craig Senrogue. And it was a little bit difficult for Craig because Charmaine was going to uni with she also did town planning. We both had done town planning. We'd met at a town planning conference, in fact. But Craig had already sort of moved on in his marital situation, and Charmaine and the new love of Craig's life were students together. So it was all very interesting. The 90s, about 1990, 89, 90. So, attending anniversaries and seeing what was there. I hadn't discovered the bookshop, if there was one. My only access to books was that little bookshelf there. But Charmaine started buying me editions of Lord Mayhare, posted from America. And she kept me ahead of my reading, and I always had a new volume to read. So I was well acquainted with who Meherabad was. And we have the good fortune of Ward Parks as part of our community, who gives wonderful lectures, and I attended 3 of his first 4 9-day workshops in America, and he's keen for people to have a good understanding of particularly Baba's early literature, as well as God Speaks and Infinite Intelligence and the like. So I've been lucky enough to acquaint myself with the bulk of Baba's literary legacy, for which I'm forever grateful, that all of those wonderful Baba lovers have worked at for so long. And I encourage everyone to take benefit from that. I'm at a loss to understand why people can't make the time to go through all of Baba's literary legacy. And we were also keen, through Charmaine's initiative rather than my own, to be frequent visitors to Meherabad with the whole family. The first time we went, John and Jeanette kindly looked after the younger children. We took the Jaya and Radha, who were 7 and 9, and you had to deal with Rani and Jack and Bill, and possibly Katie wasn't born then. Maybe she was. But that was wonderful. We had our first 3 weeks in Meherabad, and then from that time onwards, I think we waited for them all to be old enough, and we went when 2 of the younger ones had to stay down in Lower Meherabad, and they stay with me. And the older ones were up in the either in the MPC or the MPR. And then Bauji specifically changed the rules to accommodate Katie Rose because she was 6 and not 7 that year. And she said, oh, look, the Indian kids can arrive at a much earlier age than the European pilgrims. So we benefited enormously from that contact with Bauji particularly, and his Sahavas programs here in Australia, and going into Mayanazar and Ahmednagar and spending time with Bauji, and Mayanath and Raj became very close friends, and we would stay at Mayanazar with them, and I toured with Mayanath and Raj for a week, so we've been blessed with a lot of association and feel like part of the Baba family well and truly.
Was that through India?
Yeah, he was on a speaking tour, about a 1-week speaking tour, almost all the way to Nagpur. Yeah, again, another underutilized resource that people don't spend more time with Mayanath. His door is always open, as you'll find when you visit his office. Very welcoming. Yes, yeah, that's been extraordinary. Charmaine was quite insistent, and being the principal income earner in the family by a long shot, we were blessed with enough money to send as many children as were old enough, sometimes sort of 4 at a time, to the youth Sahavas. From the earliest age you could attend the youth Sahavas, and they allow Australians to attend aged 12 or 13 instead of 14 if you're an American. And I chaperoned them on the first trip, stayed with Sue Jamison and on the West Coast, and then I was making a beeline to headhunt all the Boston boys, Baba's Boston boys, so I was thrilled to learn about the 60s. I'd taken a very keen interest in the psychedelic 60s as a student at Agricultural College. I was reading all of the drug literature of the time, so I heard that Alan Cohen was quite the exponent of that drug research, and that Rick and Robert Dreyfus. So I tracked them all down and met them, and whilst in Washington I met the author of Avataric Advents, a DC lawyer, Jim McGrew. So I was very lucky in that regard. And developed a close friendship with Alan Cohen, and Alan came here in 2014, and I recommend everyone access the records, not just his talks here during the Sahavas as such, but he gave an introductory talk, and he didn't think anybody was filming him, and he said, oh good, I can tell you all the juicy bits. So if you've got a fascination with that period of time with Alpert and Leary and what they were getting up to, well, we have our own sort of, there's more of a threesome than a duo. I think Alan was part and parcel of much of that, and he tells a great story. And Rick Chapman's contribution to the Australian Sahavas shouldn't be underestimated either. They're on our website, and gives you a lot of terrific advice. He's a prolific author, and has so much wisdom to share for young people particularly. And I've caught a couple of Sahavas with Elizabeth Patterson's sort of protege, Charles Haynes, who is participated in youth's recent Springs to Harvest programs, which are there on the website. Yeah, he invited about 20 youth. We were just sort of tagging along with a big group of youth, and he and Chris paid the bill, fortunately. And but there's such good fun, and he does such terrific work. You know, I was very fortunate to be introduced to Hinduism, and you know, they say you can tell a Catholic and an Irishman anything and they'll believe you. You know, that there's a sort of inherent conviction that our life is destined, and you'll live out your destiny. And I've always been, you know, happy to take life as it comes. And how I fell into the Hare Krishna movement was just a stroke of good fortune. I was on a railway platform, and it was the last day of a 60-day rail pass, and I was thinking, wow, in 2 hours I'm going to be in Delhi. I'll have to pay for accommodation. I won't be able to sleep on the train every night. And how disappointing this is going to be. And I see these two guys in saffron. I thought they must be albinos, you know, some Indians lose their skin colour. So I wandered past them, and one has an Australian accent, one has an American accent, and I'm just blown away. I had no idea that Hinduism had sort of moved into Western society. I just hadn't been exposed to it. And I find Westerners practicing Hindu spiritual life in India. So I was curious, and when they said, "Oh, you're welcome to join us," I said, "Great." So I had to, you know, roll up my sleeping bag and my mat and pack my pack. They were getting off at the very next stop. So I was smart enough, or lucky enough, to you know, be packed up and get off and join them, and you know, overcome that natural you know, difficulty we have with anything that's new. You know, seeing a different faith practice their faith can be very off-putting. Just on Sunday, I had Muslims saying their prayers right next to me when I was filling up some water bottles at South Bank, and getting the cardboard out or rolling out their little mat. And all these things are foreign, but if you can overcome that initial you know, sort of feeling of, yeah, get me out of here, you know, you can learn so much. Again, it's, you know, one's good fortune to have those opportunities. And like, you know, every good Aussie, I was breaking my neck to travel around the world. And so, yeah, this is after I finished my university degree and become a registered valuer. I think it's 79, 78. I headed off as quick as I could overseas. You know, but I had a terrific, you know, trip for. Unexpectedly took a girlfriend I'd made only a few months beforehand, and she came with me, and we spent about 6 months in America and a few months in the Caribbean, a few months in Europe. And I was ready to send her back after 3 months. After the first 3 months, it was a return ticket, and I was at the LA airport saying, "Okay, here's the ticket." And I'd left it in Mexico City at the telephone booth where I'd, you know, phoned to check the flight. So she couldn't fly back. So we continued our trip, and about a year or so later, we're finally in Greece, and we decided to part company. And I had organised money for her to fly home, and I'd met two Aussies, two women had just arrived, having travelled overland, and they said, if you don't do the overland trip, which, you know, they've thoroughly recommended, whatever you do, don't miss India. So I thought I didn't have it in me to, embark on an overland trip. So I just went. I was standing outside a travel agency. I was actually had a couple of weeks accommodation with one of the staff there in Athens, house share situation. So I went in, I bought the cheapest ticket that took me anywhere near India. So I flew to Bangladesh and made my way from Dhaka into India. And again, that culture shock was took a couple of weeks to overcome the poverty and how radically different life is. But finally acclimatized and bought a 60-day rail pass, which took me all over India to the extreme, wherever the buses and trains would go, right up near Tibet to Ladakh, which was open at the time, and surfed in Sri Lanka. And I just sort of stayed on the trains and had a wonderful time. The extraordinarily sophisticated and detailed explanation of spirituality, just no comparison with, as a Hare Krishna devotee, we used to call Christianity primary school education. And it's the Old and New Testaments, the absolute truth, but, using terms like heaven and hell and purgatory and without much depth of understanding. And, as Ward says in his talks on reincarnation, how fair is it? And how can people really accept the notion that, you go to hell and stay there? It doesn't even make sense, like at some point you're going to burn off that bad karma. And it's so unjust. So these are such simplistic explanations that it beggars belief of how Christians, maintain their faith. But, it's easy to do so. We still church-going Catholics, and a lot of the Catholics, even the priests, are much more eclectic and, just see it as a historical, approach to God, and accommodate other faiths as being, rich and full explanations. And I think that's the beauty of the Catholic Church is that it's required to, as a priest, you're not allowed to denigrate other faith traditions. Vatican II ruled it out. It's sort of live and let live, whereas the fundamentalist Christians seem to want to pick a fight with other religious traditions, and they're in no position to do so. They got a bullock cart, Tonga, and travelled to Vrindavan. We were at Mathura station, I think, and they put me up in the international guest house for free. And then the next morning I moved into the ashram, with this Scottish guy who's a bit of a head-banging, sort of punkish type guy. And I was fascinated that people were happy to get up at 4 a.m. and have cold bath and, jump up and down in front of the deities and then walk around for an hour or two, chanting Hare Krishna. But the deity worship is just so enriching, that aspect of Hinduism, the tradition of deity worship is absolutely gorgeous. You can't help but to think that this must be something very, very special. So during classes every morning, there's sloka read from the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, and a full explanation is given, and then a off-the-cuff talk by whoever is giving class. So you really can and do grasp a good understanding. And I was so moved that after 3 weeks was about as much as I could take of that sort of culture shock. But 6 months later, when I was back in Australia, I was eager to distribute their magazines and introduce people to this to Hinduism as espoused by them, and they were so active and really effective in a vehicle to spread Hindu teaching in the West. So committed, and yeah, I was drawn to become a full-time devotee. You know, they're very organised. That I was unable to make as much money as a valuer, and I was doing locum work, making about $1,000 a week, more than I'd ever made before, practicing by myself. And these guys and girls were making more than me, selling just paraphernalia. So, and the book distribution program was enormous. There was a couple of million nationally for the book distribution program. So, you know, it was one faith that didn't remain hidden from view, and I was excited with the opportunity to make it more accessible, better known to people. And I moved to Sydney to work specifically in public relations with it, not even having sought permission. I just decided that it's too good an opportunity to get free national publicity by virtue of you know, having a public relations program, and the film crews were always happy to come and cover. And there was a lot of coverage during the mid-80s. We had a free food program that was well promoted in the media, so it was effective in that regard. But you know, it's hard to buy into one particular avataric advent, and the Hare Krishna movement is as fundamentalist as the Christian faiths are in feeling as though there's good reason to denigrate other faith traditions. And I wasn't comfortable with that. So, you know, stumbling across Meherabad and having, you know, learning that, you know, it was time for another advent, and to come and to, you know, have the opportunity to participate so early in the advent. And this advent is like no other, because you can relish the historical significance of God's playing his role, and told so beautifully by God himself, the avatar himself, that it just beggars belief why more people haven't been attracted. I think the most miraculous thing about Meherabad is that he's keeping it under wraps, and why on earth only he knows. But at some point I think it will gain recognition as being an advent, and people will celebrate it wholeheartedly. You know, I was very fortunate to be born into a family of you know, Protestants and Catholics that held their faith, took their faith quite seriously, and you know, a well-known family. The motto, good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better best, it was emblazoned and on this sort of water cart that became well known in Australian history, the Furphy water cart. And it was my great-great-grandfather who manufactured that. It was his best-selling piece of equipment. They manufactured a lot of equipment. And he was such a active and inspired preacher. He would be sought after to give sermons at different churches all over the place. And he had inscribed on his the end with that sort of family motto, he had inscribed in Pitman's shorthand, so no one could read it unless you read shorthand, you know, beer and whiskey are works of the devil, drink water, because they were Racabites of the, you know, a Christian faith that were teetotalers and thought that you know, liquor was no good at all. So that was, you know, part of my upbringing, to be in a revered family, so to speak, and boarding school is an experience that few have, but it, it's an indelible experience of associating with clergy all the time. People have given up their lives to their faith and to help others, to provide, very affordable education to fellow Catholics. It's an extraordinary thing. They all have disbanded now, those teaching traditions and probably nursing traditions as well. And they're all lay people now. But when I was at school, we had 20 Christian brothers taking Holy Communion every morning and making sure that we adopted their Christian views, and a religious class every day. Karmically, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, out of thousands only one shall seek me, and out of thousands who seek me, only one shall know me in truth. And Baba repeats that sort of calculation. I think this is even less than 1 in a million, because a thousand by 1,000's a million. So, whether there's 25 enlightened people in Australia, I'm not quite sure, but I feel as though I'm just lucky to have had all that good karma to enjoy rather than to suffer, because it's just such a lottery. You could be born into the most barbaric situations today, and you get born into the lap of luxury and gives you the opportunity to be a serious seeker. If you're working flat out and concerned about your family's future, you may not have the time or luxury to take your spiritual life as seriously as you can when you are in a well-off situation. Look, I don't have any personal experiences, so I remember being interviewed when I was a Hare Krishna devotee by a local journalist, and I said that didn't find my worshipping Krishna and Radha any different to praying in front of Mary with the infant Jesus in the church. The iconography and it's a pattern of life, I guess. It's just something you're brought up to instinctively do. We have to give a great deal of credit to people who disbelieve, to insist if it can't be seen. The rational mind is such an important thing, and the last thing we want to do is put off people who are just naturally disbelieving, because it's a very sound basis to operate from, and but they've got to be accommodating of those who have an inherent belief as well, no matter how stupid and simplistic it might seem to them. And that's the importance of spiritual literature. It can provide a very sound, rational basis for belief. It's a presentation which is very convincing, an explanation of reality which, despite never being comprehensible, it's imperceptible. We can't discredit a spiritual explanation of life. No, I had to, prove to myself that this was an avataric advent, and that wouldn't have happened unless I was drawn to, get to the bottom of how credible all of Baba's words and actions were. But it's self-evident. It's the best spiritual teaching one could ever come across, in my mind. Ward has spent many more hours exploring spiritual traditions than I have, and he's equally convinced that no, we haven't had an avataric advent to come close to Meherabad's presentations, and how it's just a disinterest. I think atheism is more about being disinterested than convinced. You find the modern atheists to be so ignorant of spiritual traditions. They're quite happy to to denigrate spirituality with very little knowledge of the traditions they're denigrating. Baoji, we've had quite a bit of contact, and Baoji would always just get straight to the point. He was just very esoteric, wanted to enforce upon us that the esoteric understanding of life, as Baba presents, is the absolute truth. And I was thrilled with him pushing that line that it's all illusion. We will never perceive it to be such. That our impressions will one day allow us for the veil to be lifted, and we'll have that experience. So, yeah, I chant Hare Krishna, not Meher Baba. As far as repeating God's names go, I don't chant Meher Baba. Because it's synonymous for me, and it's just so ingrained to chant. I do it without thinking. It's just a response. It's like a nervous reaction or something. But I see this Avictaric Advent as the all in all for me. Disinterest. Someone has to have a keen interest and make their own inquiries, and if they don't, they'll not have a clue who Meher Baba is, and they'll be dismissive naturally, as you would be. So I don't expect anyone to warm to the idea. It's better to be skeptical than hoodwinked, so it's important that people remain standoffish and not want to participate in a discussion. I think Avatar's Abode is a kick-ass place. I really do. I'm so moved to have the good fortune to associate with the people here. The Krishna consciousness puts a lot of emphasis on association with devotees. Caitanya impressed upon, it's a key principle of spiritual life is association with devotees. So to have a place where you can associate with devotees is just remarkable. The founder, the renaissance of Hinduism in Bengal and Orissa, this perfect master, Meher Baba had the Maya Ashram students, cover the life stories of Caitanya and Vivekananda and Tukaram and Ramakrishna, and Francis just loved Caitanya to bits. There's so many mentions of Caitanya in Stay with God. He'd stumbled across some early book on Caitanya's teaching, in the 30s, I guess, in the bookstores in Melbourne, and those early saints. But like Tukaram and the other Maharashtrian saints that are canvassed in very briefly in the Infinite Intelligence. These are perfect masters, and they have remarkable lives, just like Meher Baba's life is so remarkable to have taken silence. Caitanya died at a relatively early age. Namdev, when I was at the Hare Krishna reunion a few months ago, the temple president from Sydney, a delightful fellow, he wanted everyone to watch this early film from the 30s or 40s, an Indian black and white film on Namdev, and he was one of the Maharashtrian saints that are covered in Infinite Intelligence at the back. So these are absolutely remarkable individuals, and Chaitanya's teachings are the heart and soul of the Gaudiya Vaishnava, or the Hare Krishna movement. The Hare Krishna movement is just a transplant with nothing changed from India, and that's why it's so well received by expatriate Indians, because they say that this is just straight out of the streets of Calcutta or Orissa or wherever you are. Nothing's changed. The same expectations are made of members of the society. The regulatory principles are the same. Chanting that many mantras a day is the same. The elaborate artis and deity worship is all the same. So it's just fundamentalist Hinduism as practice, and it's 20 generations of gurus from Caitanya. And that teaching of Caitanya has remained very much unchanged. And, it's thrilling for me to see that Francis had such a love for Caitanya and mentions him so often. But there's, countless saints, that we can celebrate. Well, we've been lucky enough to mix with a remarkable ethnicity. They're a very cultured group of people still today, and they keep their spirituality quite hidden. We have a copy of Aboriginal Men of High Degree, which they used to go around. The Aboriginal people used to go around stealing out of libraries because they didn't want that type of knowledge to be publicly known. But it's a lecture given by a Sydney professor here at Queensland Uni, and his accounts where he just simply documented so many people's experiences of this, these mystic powers, like the yogis have mystic powers, and Baba would talk about on the plains you have these mystic powers, and these were sort of commonplace, not commonplace, unless you had them you wouldn't be chosen to participate in the higher levels of initiation as Aboriginal people, but they're not going to share any of that. I've had personal experience of a guy telling the children what the combination to the lock on my toolbox where I hid the ice creams was. Kids wanted to have an ice cream, so I used to lock them up in a little toolbox with a combination lock, and he could just say, "Oh, that's the combination." So you hear so many stories about Aboriginal people being psychic, having powers that Baba describes that people can access if they're not veiled on the plains. So I think that was part of their culture. But the whole creation stories and these sorts of things, I don't find them of particular interest in comparison to esoteric teachings that the Hindus and Sufi presentations provide. That they may be very meaningful to them. It's as simplistic to me as our Christian stories. It doesn't provide a lot of detail there like Hindu and Sufi teachings do. No, I've bought into that discussion during the Springs of Harvest. And Ben Hayes, he's had a lot of experience because he's a sort of child of a Baba lover. That's the American fellow that works at Myrtle Beach. That if you don't familiarise yourself with who Meher Baba is and what he's said, then it's not a requirement, but where's the barrier? And why not put yourself out to do that? And people continue to fail to find the time to explore about Meher Baba, their social life or their leisure or their work life or their social media. There's so many distractions which seem to get in the road these days, and I find it's quite sad that we have a up and coming generation of American and Australian at least, Baba lovers who will be, claiming to be Baba lovers. They'll appear to be Baba lovers, but they'll be bereft of much knowledge of Meher Baba and his teaching. I just struggle with that because I can't understand. It's like going to a feast and sort of playing outside. You don't even sit down and eat the meal because you haven't stumbled across how much is there to enjoy. I'm bemused. I don't understand it. We can all say we have our own relationship, unique relationship with Meher Baba and that sort of thing, but I think people should just take Rick Chapman, when he was asked by Josh at the last Springs of Harvest, what's your sort of one recommendation for up-and-coming Baba lovers? And his immediate response was, read my books. And then he immediately retracted that and said, however you can remember Meher Baba. So we can dismiss the actual instruction and just go to the sort of secondary. I don't know, I don't understand. Look, I didn't require them to sit in the classes. I required them to participate in the singing after Aarti. But the Meher Prasad's the only person that's required his children to attend all the classes here, it seems. Maybe you got a better response from Kendra and Alicia attending classes. Maybe they're more drawn to understand more. But if it's in their karma, we can't just assume that I have 6 or 8 kids, that any of them will be future Meher Baba followers. It's a ridiculous assumption. But I think we don't make any requirements. A lot of other faith traditions make some serious requirements of adherence in terms of familiarity with the text. You're supposed to be able to recite the whole Quran or something. The Hindus, are probably better versed than your average Meher Baba person in their faith tradition. So I think there's opportunity there. But the beauty of Meher Baba is that there's this no expectation. Everything is left to the individual. There's no top-down requirement. And that's next to the fact that it's kept under wraps. The second most fascinating thing about it is that it's remained there's no requirements, there's no expectations, and socially we don't browbeat or make or belittle people. I guess I might be the exception. But it's remarkable that as a society we don't have that. I just feel sorry for them. I'm a very evangelical person, and I'm aghast that people aren't, taking every opportunity. I think it's fantastic that as a society, it's just such a free thing. Yeah, it's like the rock event that you wouldn't want to miss. If you think Woodford's good, wow. It is such a hoot, like it's just a blast, non-stop. I couldn't understand why anybody wouldn't want to be there. And there are people that turn up just for Amatethi, like Brendan, just like he turned up here for about 5 days or something. He'll say, it's the 29th or it's a Thursday. Brendan will probably be here soon, So, and it's really worth going from one side of the planet to the other to attend Amatethi, and hopefully they'll have Amatethi again. So, people with the means. I'd feel terrible about my carbon footprint and struggle with that component. But, why wouldn't you want to be there? We've got, you've got how many God brothers and God sisters are there to associate with? There's tens of thousands, 25,000 God brothers and sisters. And all making contributions to Baba. So remarkable. I think all Baba lovers would like to be there every year. Just it's not everyone's so fortunate. But the Andhra people, the Hamirpur people, they're there in droves. They make the effort. Sit in a bus for 20 hours or something. Oh, everybody helps. We have two remarkable people from Colorado that have organised garbage collection, water availability for the pilgrims. They can just grab a bottle of water as they stand in line, keeping the dust down. They've been organising that. So I'm one of the crew that always there to help. And you're just sort of freeloading. You're supposedly serving, but you're freeloading on all the entertainment. And then I always eat for free down at the Hamirpur and Andhra free food. And picking up garbage is so much fun because they have a terrible habit of, but they come to Amateeth and they're reformed citizens, I'm sure. But there's still a fair bit of stuff to pick up. Yeah, most definitely. We've been so lucky. And you can't read Lord Meher and not want to go and learn all about Sufism reoriented, because it's crucial to the whole history of Meher Baba's advent. And it's a most remarkable organisation. And any sort of splitting hairs about, Baba did or didn't say that is so minor in comparison to the extraordinary achievements of that organisation and all the individuals that have benefited from being part of it. And they're very welcoming, but restrictive at the same time. It's not just a free-for-all, there's expectations made of members, big expectations, and visitors. But if you seek permission to come along, and they welcome you with open arms. And it's wonderful to follow the sort of the history of their movement as it is our movement. And I take a keen interest in the the anomalies. They get our history wrong, which is embarrassing for them, and we've failed to point out. We haven't got a complete history to rebut their misunderstanding of things, so it's a bit embarrassing for their take on things. What Baba proposed in relation to the status of the various murshids, doesn't have to can be understood at different levels. It doesn't have to be a sticking point for people. Like most things, nothing's perfect, but they can be terribly advantageous to the individual. You'd have to, know what they understand, what we understand. Like they think Francis just decided to take himself off to India because there wasn't much happening here, that he didn't want to be a murshid because there wasn't really much of an order to work with. So they just haven't explored our history very thoroughly, and they've made some silly statements in that regard, and they still stand by them even at the highest level. It's just ignorance, that's all. Yeah, look, I'm always chanting Hare Krishna and thinking of Meher Baba. And, the Catholic priest in the Nambour parish for a long time was terribly eclectic. He's a veritable intellectual. And I think there's so few Catholic priests now, you'd have to be more like that than some headbanging, fundamentalist. You wouldn't survive, I don't think. Yeah, and the current Pope is has a very broad, progressive approach to most things. Whether you're in a mosque or a temple or a church, it's all the same, isn't it? You're just trying to show your appreciation for, if you're a theist, then that's the place for you. I think everybody would be if they were lucky enough to immerse themselves in those faith traditions. It's only because of failure to become comfortable with the different faith traditions, isn't it? And to celebrate them You know, how can you not love Islam? Like, who does love, you know, like, but it's, you know, Muhammad's life was just extraordinary. If you read the biographies of his life, and if you know, we've been so lucky to have Baba give us Islam as part of our fundamental teaching. It's remarkable. It's great that you're conducting these oral histories. It's an important part of our work, documenting everything else. I started writing a veritable sermon to people that weren't even Baba lovers really this morning, and then, you know, I've covered everything. I want to thank all of the Baba lovers around the world. It's remarkable that we have the Avataric Advent in such good hands. You know, society at large will finally take an interest in it. It's just frustrating that, you know, it's not happening at this point in time. Yeah, it's very nice to have no traffic up here, isn't it? But, you know, people complain about the numbers at Amatithi, but it's so much more fun to have people in the tens of thousands than it is in the sort of... So I go for the numbers myself.